Convincing Zhang Xiuying took the entire summer. She was not a stubborn woman. She was a practical woman, shaped by decades of practical hardship. But she was also a woman rooted in the earth of Stone Hollow. Her mother was buried beneath a cypress tree on the western slope. Her ancestors' graves dotted the hillsides. She had never been more than 10 miles from the village in her entire life. The mountain was not a place to her. It was a deity, a wall, a boundary. The idea of leaving the village to live in a cave was not a plan. It was a kind of death. Chen Wei approached it carefully. He did not tell her about the stone. He did not tell her about the hollow. He told her about the famine. He told her about the furnaces. He told her, in the quiet of the house, with the door blocked and the windows covered, what he knew was coming. The grain is taken, he said. The metal is taken. The men are taken for the fires. The women are taken for the fields. The children are taken for the slogans. And there is not enough food. There will never be enough food. The cadres report numbers that are not true. The state takes grain that does not exist. And the people will eat the seed grain. The people will eat the bark. The people will eat the earth. And they will die. Zhang Xiuying listened. She did not interrupt. She was a woman who had lived through the famine of 1932. She had been a girl then, but she remembered. She remembered the bodies by the road. She remembered the silence of a village where there were no children crying. She remembered her mother boiling leather to make soup. How do you know? She asked. How do you know what is coming? The mountain tells me, he said. It was the only language he could offer. The mountain speaks in dreams. It showed me the furnaces. It showed me the empty fields. It showed me the snow coming, and the people lying down in the snow and not rising. She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were dark and deep. The mountain has never spoken to me, she said. But it has spoken to my grandmother. And to her grandmother. There are those who hear the mountain. I did not think my son was one of them. I am, he said. And the mountain says, leave. Before the snow. Take the family to the high place. Survive. Wait. The world will change. The fire will burn out. And those who live in the high places will come down and plant again. She looked at her hands. The hands of a woman who had scrubbed, carried, planted, harvested, and buried. The hands that had nursed 2 children and lost 2 more in the years before Chen Wei was born. The hands that had held her son's hand when he was feverish and dying, and felt the warmth leave him, and felt it return. My mother is buried here, she said. I know. I cannot leave her alone. She is not alone. She is with the mountain. And the mountain is everywhere. The high valley is also the mountain. She will be there, too. In the wind. In the stone. In the water. Zhang Xiuying wept. Not loudly. She was a woman who had learned to weep without sound, as a survival skill. The tears ran down her face and fell onto her hands, and she let them fall. If we go, she said, we go as a family. All of us. Your father, you, Xiaoming, and me. We do not leave anyone behind. We do not send anyone to the cadres with lies. We go together, or we do not go. Together, Chen Wei said. I promise. And if the cadres follow? If they find us? They will not follow. The mountain does not know them. They will not find the path. And if they do? He paused. He had not planned this far. But the words came. Then we will be higher than they are. We will know the ground. They will not. She nodded slowly. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She looked at the small room, the earthen floor, the thatched ceiling, the few possessions that remained after the cadres had taken their share. There was not much to leave behind. A life measured in clay pots and wooden stools. When? She asked. After the harvest. Before the frost. What do we take? Only what we can carry. What we cannot carry, we hide. What we cannot hide, we leave. The mountain will provide. I have been preparing. I have stores. In the high valley. I have been carrying them there, little by little, for months. It was the closest he had come to telling her the truth. She looked at him. She did not ask how he had carried stores to a place he had never been, or how he had hidden them where no one could find them. She simply accepted. Perhaps she suspected something. Perhaps she thought he had a secret cache, a hidden hole in the ground. It did not matter. She accepted. Then I will go, she said. I will leave my mother's grave. I will leave the village. I will follow my son into the mountain. And I will pray that the mountain speaks truly. Chen Wei knelt before her. It was a gesture of respect, of ancient filial piety that the modern world had taught him was oppressive, but that his body knew was right. He pressed his forehead to the earthen floor before her feet. Thank you, mother. She placed her hand on his head. Her fingers were rough. They trembled, but they were warm. Rise, my son, and prepare. We have a long road to walk. He rose. Outside, the furnace was smoking. The cadres were shouting. The world of Stone Hollow was ending, not with a revolution, but with a slow suffocation. But in one small house, a family had made a decision. They would not die in the smoke. They would live in the mountain, and they would survive. Chen Wei touched the stone. He felt the hollow, vast and gray and full of promise. He had 3 months, 90 days to gather enough to survive a winter in the high valley. He had stores, yes, but he needed more. More meat, more fuel, more medicine, more hope. He went to work, and the ghost of Stone Hollow became a storm of silent preparation. The summer burned away, and the autumn came with a false abundance. The harvest was decent, not great, but decent. The rice filled the fields with gold. The cadres announced that the commune had exceeded its target by 40%. The villagers knew this was a lie, but they also knew that the grain in the fields was real. They hoped. They dared to hope that the winter would be survivable. Chen Wei did not hope. He prepared. He had spent the summer building his stores in the hollow to a level that would have been impossible without magic. He had 40 rabbits, preserved in the moment of their death. He had 12 pheasants. He had 50 fish, still suspended in the water they had been caught in, their gills still flaring, their scales still bright. He had bamboo shoots by the hundredweight. He had wild tubers, mushrooms, ferns, and greens. He had salt, honey, medicine, and the steel knife from Zhou. He had made 2 more bows, stronger than the first, and a quiver of arrows. He had rope, woven from hemp and vine. He had flint and tinder. He had even stolen a small iron pot from the communal kitchen, hiding it in the manure pile and transferring it to the hollow when no one was looking. It was a fortune, a mountain of wealth, compressed into a space the size of a small room. But he also prepared the house. He made his family gather their things, spare clothes, blankets, the few pieces of jade and silver that had been hidden through the revolutions, the grandmother's sewing needles, the father's flint and steel. They packed them into bags that could be carried on their backs. They did it at night, when the cadres slept, when the village was dark. They planned to leave on the night of the full moon in October. The harvest would be in. The first frost would have come, but the deep snow would not yet have closed the high passes. It was the perfect window, the only window, but the world did not cooperate with their plan. On the 3rd night of October, the cadres made an announcement. There was to be a great meeting, a celebration of the harvest and the success of the commune. Every household was required to attend. Every person was required to be present. The red papers would be distributed. New work assignments would be given. The steel production quota was being raised. The backyard furnaces would burn through the winter. There would be no rest. Chen Wei listened to Lu Feng's voice booming through the megaphone, and he felt a cold certainty. This was not a coincidence. The cadres were tightening their grip. They suspected something. They suspected that the people were hiding food, hiding strength, hiding the will to resist. The meeting was a trap, a way to count heads, to search houses, to root out the secret keepers. He found his father. They spoke in the pig shed, the only place where the stink guaranteed privacy. We must leave tonight, Chen Wei said. Not in 3 days. Tonight. The passes are not ready. The snow is not here yet. But the cadres will be here. Tonight. They will search the houses. They will find the bags. They will find the knives. They will take everything, and we will be left with nothing but the clothes on our backs. Chen Dali's jaw tightened. He was a man who liked plans, who liked order, who liked to face difficulty with preparation. But he was also a man who knew when to run. Your mother? She is ready. She has been ready for months. Xiaoming. He knows the path. I have taken him to the waterfall. Not to the cave, but to the waterfall. He knows the landmark. Chen Dali nodded. Then we go? Tonight. After the meeting. When the cadres are drunk. When the village is sleeping. The meeting was held in the square. The cadres had built a platform of wooden planks. They hung red lanterns. They brought out the rice wine, the good wine, the wine that had been confiscated from the villagers and was now being used to celebrate the confiscation. Lu Feng spoke for an hour. He praised the commune. He praised the steel. He praised the quotas. He announced that Stone Hollow was a model village. He announced that the county chief would visit next month. He announced that the village would donate its entire harvest surplus to the national project. The villagers listened. They did not cheer. They did not even nod. They only stood, their faces blank in the lantern light, and listened to the death sentence of their winter. Chen Wei stood with his family. He wore his best clothes, actually his only clothes, carefully patched. He held Xiaoming's hand. He watched the cadres drink. He watched Lu Feng's face grow red with wine and self-importance. He watched the red papers being handed out. Work assignments, production schedules, new rules, no private gathering, no private eating, all meals in the communal kitchen, all labor directed by the team leader, all hunting forbidden, all fishing forbidden. The mountain belonged to the people. The game belonged to the people. The fish belonged to the people. And the people would starve together, equally. The meeting ended. The villagers returned to their homes. The cadres retired to the building they had commandeered as an office, and the sound of their drinking continued into the night. Chen Wei waited until the moon was high. He woke his family. They had slept in their clothes. They took their bags. They took nothing else. The house was left as it was, the pots and stools and sleeping mats abandoned to the cadres in the winter. They slipped out the back door, into the shadows between the houses, moving without sound. They reached the edge of the village. The path to the mountain lay before them, silver in the moonlight. Behind them, Stone Hollow slept, unaware that 4 of its souls were escaping into the dark. Chen Wei looked back once. He saw the thatch roof of his house, the chimney cold, the red paper strip on the door fluttering in the wind. He saw the furnace chimney, still warm, rising against the stars. He saw the village that had been his home, his prison, his battlefield. Then he turned. He touched the stone at his chest. He led his family into the mountain, and the ghost of Stone Hollow vanished into the bamboo, leaving only the wind and the waiting dark behind. The mountain path did not forgive weakness. It began as a trail, barely visible, used by goats and hunters and the occasional madman. It climbed steeply, switchbacking up the slope through bamboo that grew so thick it was like walking through a tunnel. The bamboo did not rustle as they passed. They moved too carefully for that. Chen Wei led, then Xiaoming, then their mother, then their father, who carried the rear guard, his eyes watching the darkness behind them for any sign of pursuit. They did not speak. Speech was too dangerous. Sound carried in the mountain. The cadres might be drunk, but the village dogs were not. The dogs knew their footsteps. If the dogs barked, the village might wake. If the village woke, the escape might end. Chen Wei moved by memory and by the map that Zhou had drawn in his mind. He had traveled this path once before, in daylight, moving fast. Now, in darkness, with his family behind him, it was different. Every step was a negotiation. The bamboo was slick with dew. The stones were loose. The drops were sudden and deep. One wrong step, and a leg would break. And a broken leg on this path was a death sentence. They climbed for 3 hours. The village was far below them now, a cluster of lights that might have been fireflies. The air grew thinner. The bamboo gave way to pine, and the smell of resin filled their lungs. The path became steeper, more rock than soil, and they were forced to use their hands, pulling themselves up by roots and stone ledges. Zhang Xiuying was struggling. She was strong. Years of labor had made her strong, but she was not young, and the mountain was not kind. She began to breathe heavily, gasping. Chen Wei stopped. He let her rest against a rock. He gave her water from a gourd. He did not rush her. Rushing caused mistakes. Mistakes caused injury. Injury caused death. Not far, he whispered. The waterfall is close. She nodded. She did not complain. She was a woman who had never complained, who had learned that complaining was a luxury for those who had others to listen. She stood. She continued. They reached the waterfall at dawn. It was not a large waterfall. The mountain stream, swollen with autumn rain, dropped 20 feet over a lip of black stone into a pool that boiled with white foam. The noise was tremendous, a roar that filled the valley and made speech impossible. The spray was cold, filling the air with mist that caught the first light of the sun and turned it into rainbows. Behind the waterfall, Chen Wei knew, was the cave. He had not seen it. Zhou had described it. A natural overhang, deep enough for 4 people to sleep. Dry, because the stone lip above kept the spray away. Hidden, because the waterfall was a curtain of water and light that no one would think to pass through. He led them around the pool, over wet stones, to the edge of the falls. The water crashed beside them, cold and powerful. He found the path that Zhou had described, a narrow ledge, slick with spray, that ran behind the curtain of water. It was no more than a foot wide. The drop beside it was into the boiling pool. He went first. He pressed his back against the wet stone. He edged along the ledge. The water roared in his ears. The spray soaked him instantly. He could not see. He could only feel. The stone, the ledge, the drop. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, and then he was through. Behind the waterfall. The cave was real. It was more than Zhou had described. It was not just an overhang. It was a chamber, deep and dry, the floor covered in soft sand and ancient leaves. The ceiling was high enough to stand. The walls were dark stone, veined with quartz that caught the light from the waterfall and glowed like stars. The sound was muted here, a background roar that would become silence by comparison. He turned. He reached through the water. He took his brother's hand. He pulled Xiaoming through. The boy was soaked, terrified, but his eyes were wide with wonder. Then their mother. She moved slowly, carefully, her face pale with fear of the drop. But she made it. She stepped into the cave and collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving. Then, Chindali. The father moved like a man half his age, his scarred hands finding holds in the wet stone, his body balanced with the grace of a mountain goat. He stepped through the water and into the cave. He stood. He looked around. He nodded. "This is good," he said. His voice was barely audible over the roar. "This is very good." They were inside. They were hidden. They were behind the waterfall, in a cave that did not exist on any map, that no cadre could find, that no dog could scent. They were safe, or at least, safer than they had been in the village. Chen Wei moved to the back of the cave. It was deeper than he had thought. It extended into the mountain, narrowing to a passage that a man could crawl through. And beyond that, he sensed, was more space. More cave, more mountain. But that was for later. For now, they had the main chamber. They had the sand floor. They had the waterfall wall, and the light that came through it in rainbows, and the sound that would hide their voices from any pursuer. He brought out the blankets from the hollow. He had stored them there, weeks ago, preserving them from the damp. He laid them on the sand. He brought out food, dried meat, tubers, the honey. He laid them out like a feast, though it was not yet a feast, only the promise of one. His family watched. They did not ask how he had carried these things. They did not ask where they had been hidden. They were too tired, too relieved, too overwhelmed. They only watched as their son produced impossible bounty from a small bag, from his shirt, from the stone around his neck. They ate. They drank water from the pool, cupped in their hands, cold and sweet. They lay on the blankets, their clothes steaming dry in the cave's constant temperature. And they slept. For the first time in months, they slept without fear of the cadres, without fear of the furnace, without fear of the red papers on the door. Chen Wei did not sleep. He sat at the edge of the waterfall, looking through the curtain of water at the world outside. The sun was rising. The mountain was green and gold and red with autumn. The stream rushed past. The birds were waking. He touched the stone. He entered the hollow. He looked at his stores. He had enough to last 3 months, perhaps 4, if they were careful. But the winter was coming. The winter in the high valley would be harder than the winter in the village. The game would be scarce. The fish would be under ice. The gathering would be impossible. He needed more. He needed to hunt while he still could. He needed to fish while the streams were open. He needed to fill the hollow until it was a fortress of calories and warmth and medicine. He had perhaps 6 weeks before the deep snow closed the passes. 6 weeks to secure their survival for the 6 months of winter. He returned to the cave. He looked at his family, sleeping on the sand, their faces finally peaceful. He made a silent vow. He would work until he could not stand. He would hunt until the mountain had no more to give. He would fill the stone with life, and he would keep these people alive through the dark. He was 16 years old. He had died once. He would not die again, and he would not let them die. He stood. He walked to the back of the cave. He found the passage that led deeper. He would explore it later. But for now, he needed to rest. Just for an hour. Just enough to let his body recover from the night march. He lay down on the sand, apart from his family, the stone in his hand. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the rain on the interstate, he slept without dreaming of the modern world. He dreamed only of the mountain, and in the dream, the mountain spoke his name. The 6 weeks that followed were the most intense of Chen Wei's life. Not the most dangerous, the most intense. He was a machine of survival. He rose before dawn, while his family slept warm in the cave behind the waterfall. He moved through the high valley like a spirit, and he harvested everything that could be harvested. The high valley was a secret world. It was a bowl of land, perhaps 2 miles across, surrounded by peaks that hid it from the lower world. It had its own stream, its own lake, its own forest of pine and birch and wild walnut. The cadres did not know it existed. The villagers did not know it existed. Only the hunters knew, and the hunters were few, and the hunters were gone, dead or fled or swallowed by the revolution. Chen Wei mapped it. He walked every inch. He found the deer trails, the stands of wild chestnut, the groves of walnut, the thickets where the pheasants wintered, the lake where the fish grew large and lazy, never fished by human hands. He found a hot spring, steaming in a grotto of stone, where they could bathe and warm themselves in the depths of winter. He found another cave, smaller but dry, that could be used as a smokehouse. He fished. He set nets in the lake. He set lines in the stream. He used every method he knew, modern methods from his memories of fishing shows, primitive methods from the body of Chen Wei, and new methods he invented from desperation. He caught fish by the dozens. Carp, trout, a species of catfish that he did not recognize, large and pale from the deep water. He transferred them to the hollow alive, or dead, or gutted, depending on the time he had and the danger he faced. The fish pile in the hollow grew into a silver mound. He hunted. He set snares by the hundred, along deer trails, in pheasant thickets, at the edge of the wild boar wallows. He used the bow he had made, and the arrows, and he killed 2 deer, a doe and a young buck, with shots to the heart that dropped them where they stood. The deer were massive. They represented hundreds of pounds of meat. He transferred them to the hollow, feeling the familiar drain, the nosebleed, the tunnel vision, but mastering it now, controlling it. He was becoming stronger. The stone was becoming part of him. He gathered. He stripped the nut trees. He filled bags with chestnuts and walnuts. He found a patch of wild millet that had seeded itself by the stream, and he cut it with his stone knife, shaking the grain into baskets. He found mushrooms in the forest floor, more than he had ever seen, and he sorted them by species, storing only the ones he knew, discarding the dangerous ones with regret. He dug roots. He stripped bark from birch trees for tea and kindling. He found wild onions and garlic and peppers that made his eyes water with joy. He also built. He taught his father to help. They could not be seen from below, but they could be seen from the air, and the cadres had an old plane that flew over occasionally, dropping leaflets. So they built under the trees. They built a smokehouse in the small cave, using green wood that would smoke rather than burn. They built racks of green saplings for drying fish and meat. They built a privy pit, deep and covered. They built a stone-lined hearth in the main cave, with a chimney that vented through a crack in the ceiling, dispersing the smoke so it would not rise in a visible column. Xiaoming became his assistant. The boy was everywhere. He checked snares. He gathered kindling. He fished with a line made from braided vine. He learned to clean fish, to skin rabbits, to smoke meat over the greenwood fire. He was 10 years old, and he was becoming a survivor. His eyes lost the last of their childish softness. They became sharp, watchful, ancient. Zhang Xiuying kept the camp. She cooked. She mended. She dried herbs and made medicines. She turned the wild bounty into meals that were more than the sum of their parts. She used the wild garlic and the onions and the peppers to make stews that filled the cave with smells that would have been impossible in the village. She cried sometimes, at night, when she thought the others were asleep. She cried for her mother's grave. She cried for the village. She cried for the life she had left. But she did not cry during the day. During the day, she worked with a ferocity that matched her son's. The snow began in November, first as sleet, then as flurries, then as a steady, heavy fall that turned the high valley into a world of white. The passes closed. The paths disappeared. The lake froze at the edges. The stream became a trickle under a sheath of ice. But they were ready. They were more than ready. Chen Wei made a final trip before the deep snow made movement impossible. He went to the smokehouse cave. He filled it with the last of the meat: venison, boar, rabbit, pheasant, fish. He smoked them over the green fire for 3 days, turning them, watching them, until they were dark and hard and preserved. Then he transferred them to the hollow. The smokehouse was a decoy. If anyone found the cave, they would find a smokehouse, not a home. The real home was behind the waterfall. The real food was in the stone. He returned to the cave on the last day of clear weather. The snow was falling heavily as he squeezed through the waterfall. His family was waiting. They had built a fire. They had cooked a meal of fresh fish and wild mushrooms and chestnut porridge. They had made the cave warm, lit by fire and by the light that came through the waterfall, which was now a curtain of ice and falling water, crystalline and blue. Chen Wei sat with them. He ate. He was exhausted. His body was a map of scars, cuts from the knife, bruises from falls, burns from the fire, the constant ache of muscles pushed beyond their limit. He was 16, but he looked 20. He felt 40, but he was alive, and his family was alive, and they had enough. He touched the stone. He entered the hollow one last time before sleep. He looked at what he had built. The inventory was staggering. The boar, the deer, the fish, the rabbits, the pheasants, the nuts, the grain, the tubers, the herbs, the honey, the salt, the medicine, the tools. It was not just a survival cache. It was a storehouse, a treasury, a small kingdom of calories hidden in a space that no one could find. He counted. He estimated. If they were careful, and they would be careful, they had enough to last until spring. Not just enough to survive. Enough to live. Enough to be strong. Enough to wait out the famine and emerge when the world had changed. He returned to the cave. He lay on his blanket, beside the fire, beside his family. The waterfall roared. The ice formed. The mountain closed around them like a fist. But inside the fist, they were warm. They were fed. They were together. And somewhere below, in the village, the furnace was burning. The cadres were eating. The people were starving. The world was falling apart. But in the high valley, behind the waterfall, for people were alive. For people were waiting. And a boy with a magic stone was keeping them safe from the dark. Chen Wei closed his eyes. He slept. And the snow fell. Winter in the high valley was not a season. It was a siege. The snow fell for 40 days without stopping. Not always heavily. Sometimes it was a light, dry powder that swirled like dust in the wind. Sometimes it was a heavy, wet fall that snapped branches under its weight. But it never stopped. The world outside the cave became a featureless white, the horizon lost, the sky and the ground merging into a single pale glow. The temperature dropped. The waterfall froze completely, becoming a wall of blue ice that sealed the cave from the outside world. Light still came through it, a strange, diffuse blue that made the cave feel like the inside of a glacier. But no sound came through. The roar of the water was gone, replaced by the deeper silence of ice and snow. The only sound was the wind, howling across the mountain peaks, a sound that never stopped, that became like a second heartbeat. They lived. They lived well, by the standards of the mountain. They lived like royalty, by the standards of Stone Hollow. Each day had a rhythm. They rose when the light through the ice wall grew bright enough to see. They built up the fire from the banked coals. They cooked breakfast, fish porridge, nut bread, dried meat softened in water. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, making it last. They had no need to hurry. There was nowhere to go. After breakfast, Chun Dali and Xiao Ming would venture out. Not far. Just to the entrance behind the ice wall, or to the small side passage that led to a vent in the cliff, where they could look out at the snow. They would check the snares that Chen Wei had set in the autumn, knowing that most would be empty, but hoping. Sometimes they found a rabbit, frozen stiff but edible. Sometimes they found a pheasant. Rarely, they found a fox, which they took for the fur as much as the meat. Chen Wei and his mother stayed in the cave. They worked. They mended clothes. They dried herbs. They prepared food for the next day. They talked. They talked more than they ever had in the village, where exhaustion and fear had kept them silent. They talked about the mountain, about the ancestors, about the spirits that lived in the high places. Zhang Xiuying told stories that her grandmother had told her, stories of mountain gods and water spirits and the fox that could take human form. Chen Wei listened, and he learned. He learned the language of the mountain, the mythology that was also a map of survival. In the afternoons, they bathed. The hot spring was a miracle. It was a short walk from the cave, through a passage that Chen Wei had found, to a grotto where the water bubbled up from deep in the earth. It was hot, almost too hot, but they learned to sit in it for a few minutes at a time, then step out, then return. The warmth soaked into their bones. It cleaned them. It healed the sores and cuts and aches of the autumn labor. It was, more than the food, the thing that kept them healthy. In a world where hygiene was a luxury and disease was a constant threat, the hot spring was a gift beyond measure. They also trained. Chen Wei taught Xiaoming to use the bow. They could not shoot outside. The sound might carry, and the arrows would be lost in the snow, but they practiced in the cave, aiming at a target of woven straw. Xiaoming grew strong. His arms, once sticks, began to show muscle. His aim improved. He could hit a mark at 20 paces, then 30, then 40. Chen Wei trained with a spear. He had carved it from a straight sapling, hardened in fire, tipped with a stone point. He practiced thrusts and parries in the open space near the cave entrance. He was not a young man, but he was determined. If the cadres came, if the world came, he would not die like a rabbit. He would fight. Chen Wei trained himself. He practiced the knife. He practiced movement in the dark. He practiced entering and exiting the hollow quickly. Minimizing the time, he was vulnerable. He practiced moving silently over the cave floor, his bare feet finding the soft places, avoiding the stones that would click or shift. And he planned. He knew that winter would end. He knew that when it ended, they would have to face the world again. The cadres would still be there. The famine would still be raging. The village would be dying. They would have to decide whether to return, whether to stay, whether to move deeper into the mountain. He planned for all three possibilities. He mapped the high valley in his mind. He mapped the caves beyond the main chamber. He mapped the paths that led to other valleys, other mountains, other worlds. At night, they ate again. A larger meal. Meat and tubers and nuts. Sometimes, as a luxury, they had honey on the nut bread. They sat around the fire and told stories. Chen Wei told stories of his time in the army, during the war against the Japanese. He had never spoken of these things in the village. But in the cave, with the ice wall glowing blue and the fire crackling, he spoke. He spoke of battles he had seen, of friends he had lost, of the day he had lost his fingers to a shell fragment. He spoke, and his children listened, and something healed in him that had been broken for years. Zhang Xiuying sang. She had a voice that was rough from work and cold, but clear. She sang mountain songs, lullabies, hymns to the earth. She sang, and the cave filled with music that seemed older than the revolution, older than the dynasty, older than the human presence on the mountain. It was the sound of survival, the sound of endurance, the sound of a woman who had decided to live and who expressed that decision in song. Xiaoming drew. He used charcoal from the fire on flat pieces of stone. He drew the cave, the waterfall, the fish, his family, his brother, tall and silent, watching the ice wall. He drew, and he grew, and he became something more than the starving child he had been. And Chen Wei? Chen Wei watched. He listened. He participated. He told stories of his own, careful stories, tales of the modern world dressed up as fables. He spoke of a world where people flew in metal birds, where they talked across distances without speaking, where food was so plentiful that it was thrown away. They did not believe him, but they enjoyed the stories. They thought he was a dreamer, a boy with a mountain spirit's imagination. He did not tell them the truth. He could not, but he gave them what he could. He gave them safety. He gave them food. He gave them warmth. And he gave them hope. The hope that the winter would end. The hope that the world would change. The hope that they would survive to see the spring. And so the winter passed. Not easily. Not without fear. The cold was bitter. The wind was relentless. The dark was long. But they were together. They were fed. They were warm. And in the gray void of the hollow, the stores waited, untouched, preserved, ready for the days when the fresh food ran out, and the preserved food was all that remained. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The ice wall thickened. The snow deepened. The mountain held its breath. And in the cave behind the waterfall, a family lived through the darkest winter of their lives, and they lived well. The thaw began in late February. The ice wall behind the waterfall began to drip. The sound of water returned, first as a trickle, then as a stream, then as the full-throated roar that had hidden them all winter. The snow retreated from the valley, revealing brown earth and the first shoots of wild garlic. The streams swelled with meltwater. The lake, frozen for 3 months, began to groan and crack, the ice breaking up into blue plates that drifted on the surface. They emerged, cautiously, like animals from a den. Chen Wei was the first to go out. He moved through the valley, checking the land. The snares had been destroyed by snow and ice, but the trails were clear. The animals were returning. He saw deer tracks in the mud, rabbit sign. The pheasants were calling again, their mating songs echoing from the thickets. The mountain was waking, and they were waking with it. But the world was also waking, and the world had not forgotten them. They had been gone for 4 months. The cadres had noticed. Lu Feng had searched the village for clues. He had found the abandoned house, the empty beds, the cold hearth. He had questioned the neighbors. He had threatened them. He had written a report. A family had deserted the commune. A family had rejected the revolution. A family had fled into the mountain, taking their labor and their loyalty with them. The cadres had searched. In November, before the deep snow, they had sent a party up the mountain paths. But the paths were hidden, and the snow had come early, and the searchers had turned back, cold and frightened, and cursing the superstitious peasants who had gone to die in the snow. But now the snow was gone, and the searchers would come again. Chen Wei found the signs on his 3rd day of reconnaissance. He found boot prints in the mud of the lower trail. He found cigarette butts, still fresh, dropped by men who did not know that a mountain hunter could read the age of a print by the moisture in the soil. He found a scrap of red paper, a corner of a propaganda leaflet, caught on a branch. The cadres had been here. Recently, within the week. He returned to the cave. His family was outside, bathing in the sun, feeling the warmth on their skin for the first time in months. They were smiling. They were laughing. Xiaoming was chasing a butterfly, his feet bare in the cold mud, his face full of a joy that Chen Wei had never seen in him before. Chen Wei did not smile. He told them what he had found. The laughter stopped. The sun was still warm. The valley was still beautiful. But the shadow had returned. They will come, Chen Wei said. Perhaps this week. Perhaps next. But they will come. They cannot allow us to exist. We are a rejection of their power. We are proof that the mountain is stronger than the commune. They will hunt us. They will find the cave, or they will find the smokehouse, or they will find the trails. And when they find us, they will take us back. Or worse. What do we do? Chindali asked. His voice was hard. He had expected this. He had been waiting for it. We hide deeper. Or we fight. Or we run. Where? Zhang Xiuying asked. We have nowhere else. We have the mountain. The mountain is infinite. There are caves beyond this one. There are valleys beyond this valley. There are paths that lead to other mountains, other provinces, other worlds. You speak of the mountain's spirit again, his mother said. But she did not doubt him. She only wanted to understand. I speak of survival. The cave behind the waterfall is no longer safe. It is a known place. The smokehouse is a known place. The trails are known. We must leave them behind. We must become ghosts again. But this time, we must be ghosts in a larger world. He had been thinking about this all winter. He had explored the passage at the back of the cave. It led deep into the mountain. It was narrow, dangerous, but passable. He had followed it for an hour, with a torch made of pine resin, and he had found another chamber. And another. A network of caves, connected by passages, some large enough to stand in, some so tight that a man had to crawl. And beyond them, he was certain, there was another exit. Another valley. Another world. We move into the deep caves, he said. We leave the waterfall cave as a decoy. We make it look like we abandoned it. We leave the smokehouse full of old meat. We leave the trails obvious. The cadres will find the cave. They will find the smokehouse. They will think we died in the winter, or that we moved on, or that we were never more than a rumor. And while they search the empty places, we will live in the dark and wait and survive. The deep caves have no light, Chindali said. We have fire. They have no water. We have streams that run through them. I have heard them. They have no food. We have the hollow. Chen Wei paused. He had never said the name aloud. We have the stores. The stone. The mountain's gift. We can survive anywhere, as long as we have the stone. They looked at him. They looked at the stone around his neck. They had always known it was special. They had always known that their son produced impossible things from impossible places. But now, hearing him name it, hearing him claim it as a weapon of survival, they understood something more. They understood that the stone was not just luck. It was a power, a responsibility. a covenant between their sun and the mountain. I will follow you, Chen said. I will follow you, Zhang Xiuying said. I will follow you, Xiaoming said, his eyes sharp and steady. They moved. That day, they did not hesitate. They packed their blankets, their tools, their clothes. They carried them through the passage at the back of the cave. Chen Wei led with a torch. The passage was tight. They had to crawl in places. The stone was sharp. The air was cold and still. But they moved. They kept moving. They reached the first chamber. It was small, but dry. They reached the second, larger, with a stream running through it, the water clear and cold. They reached the third, a cathedral of stone, stalactites hanging like the teeth of a dragon, the walls glittering with mica and quartz. And beyond that, more passages, more chambers, a labyrinth that seemed to have no end. Chen Wei chose a chamber for them. It was near the stream. It had a flat floor of sand and clay. It was deep enough that the sound of the stream would hide their voices. And it was connected to a ventilation shaft that brought fresh air from somewhere above, keeping the air breathable. They made it home. They built a fire in a stone circle. They laid their blankets. They hung their tools on stone projections. And they waited. Not passively, actively. They prepared. They planned. They made themselves ready for the searchers who would come. 2 days later, the searchers arrived. Chen Wei watched them from a ventilation shaft. He had found a crack in the rock that looked out over the high valley. He could see the waterfall, the cave, the smokehouse. He saw the blue uniforms. He saw Lu Feng, older now, thinner, his glasses still held together by wire. He saw the men with guns, not modern rifles, but old muskets and hunting pieces, confiscated from the villagers and now turned against them. They searched the cave. They found the blankets, the cold hearth, the abandoned tools. They searched the smokehouse. They found the old meat, frozen and ruined. They cursed. They kicked the stones. They shouted into the empty valley, demanding that the deserters show themselves. No one answered. The mountain did not answer. The waterfall roared. The birds sang. And the Chen family, for ghosts in the deep stone, did not make a sound. The searchers stayed for 3 days. They searched the valley. They fired their guns into the air, hoping to flush out game or people. They found nothing. They found the deer trails, the rabbit holes, the empty snares. They found a world that was empty of humans, full of animals, indifferent to the revolution. On the 4th day, they left. Lu Feng wrote something in his notebook. He looked around the valley one last time, his face suspicious, his eyes narrowed. Then he turned. He led his men down the mountain. They did not return. Chen Wei watched them go. He waited another day. Then he emerged from the shaft. He went to the waterfall cave. He erased the last signs of their habitation. He scattered the ashes. He moved the stones. He made the cave look like a bear's den, or a fox's hole, or nothing at all. He returned to the deep chamber. His family was there. They were safe. They were hidden. And they had enough to survive for a year, if need be. 2 years. 5 years. The spring came. The valley turned green. The animals returned. And in the deep caves, the Chen family lived. They were not in the world. They were not of the world. They were in the mountain, and the mountain was keeping them alive. Chen Wei touched the stone. He felt the hollow, vast and full. He felt the weight of survival. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended his modern knowledge, that they had won the first battle. The war was not over, but they had won the first round. He looked at his family. His father, scarred and strong. His mother, singing softly as she mended. His brother, drawing on the stone with charcoal, his face full of concentration and life. They were alive, and that was enough. For now, that was enough. Life in the deep caves was different from life in the waterfall chamber. It was harder in some ways, easier in others. There was no natural light. The only illumination came from the fire, from torches of pine resin, and from the strange glow of quartz veins that seemed to store and release the light like batteries. The air was cool but constant, never freezing, never sweltering. The stream provided water. The stone provided shelter. And the silence, absolute, total, complete, was a new kind of presence. Chen Wei explored. Every day, he mapped more of the cave system. He found passages that led nowhere, ending in chambers of breathtaking beauty, stalactites and stalagmites grown together into columns of stone like the pillars of a forgotten temple. He found underground pools, the water so still and clear that it was like looking into a mirror of black glass. He found drawings on the walls, painted in ochre and charcoal, ancient beyond measuring, stick figures of hunters and animals that predated the Chinese civilization itself. He found bats, thousands of them, hanging in a chamber that stank of guano, their wings folded, their eyes gleaming in the torchlight. He did not disturb them. He only noted their presence. Guano was valuable. It was saltpeter. It was fertilizer. It was a resource for the future. He found mushrooms that grew in the dark, pale and swollen, feeding on the roots of trees that had fallen into sinkholes centuries ago. Some were edible, some were not. He tested them carefully, using his modern knowledge and the body's instincts. He found new medicines, fungi that stopped bleeding, moss that numbed pain, lichen that reduced fever when brewed into tea. He also found dangers. The cave system was not stable. There were places where the floor was thin, covering a void below. There were places where the ceiling was cracked, waiting for the next earthquake to collapse. There were flooded passages, the water black and cold, that would drown a man in seconds. He mapped these too. He marked them with piles of white stones. He memorized them. He taught his family to avoid them. The family adapted. They became creatures of the dark. Their eyes grew sharper in the dim light. Their hearing became acute. They could hear the drip of water from 100 paces. They could sense the shift in air pressure that meant a new passage. They learned to sleep without the sun, to wake by the rhythm of the body rather than the light of the sky. Chen Wei became the firekeeper. He maintained the fires with a religious devotion. He gathered the wood that Chen Wei brought from the surface. He dried it. He stacked it. He kept it burning. He learned to read the smoke, to adjust the ventilation so that the fires did not consume the air or produce too much smoke. He was a man who had spent his life in the open air, and now he lived in the stone, and he adapted because he had no choice. Zhang Xiuying became the healer and the cook. She used the mushrooms, the lichens, the herbs that Chen Wei brought. She brewed teas that kept them healthy. She cooked meals that were simple but nourishing, using the stores from the hollow and the fresh food that Chen Wei gathered on his surface trips. She sang in the caves, and the sound was strange, echoing off the stone, returning to her in harmonies that seemed to come from the mountain itself. Xiaoming became the apprentice. He followed Chen Wei everywhere. He learned the caves. He learned the paths. He learned to read the stone. He carried a small torch. He had his own bow now, a smaller version that Chen Wei had made for him. He practiced in the larger chambers, shooting at targets in the dark. He was becoming a hunter, a survivor, a man before his time. And Chen Wei? Chen Wei became the bridge. He moved between the surface and the deep. He hunted. He gathered. He fished. He brought the bounty back to the cave. He also brought news. He watched the village from a distance. He watched the cadres. He watched the famine unfold. It was worse than he had imagined. The village was dying. Stone Hollow had become a shell. The people were thin, skeletal. The communal kitchen had closed. There was no food to cook. The cadres had left, driven off by the very starvation they had helped create, or transferred to other posts where they could falsify new numbers. Lu Feng was gone. No one knew where. The villagers who remained were eating bark. They were eating grass. They were eating the thatch from their roofs, boiling it into a kind of paste that did nothing but fill the stomach for an hour. The old were dying. The young were dying. The strong were dying. It was the famine. It had arrived. It was consuming the mountain. Chen Wei wanted to help. He wanted to bring food to the village. He wanted to save them all. But he knew he could not. He had enough for his family. He did not have enough for a village. And if he tried, if he revealed his stores, he would be overwhelmed. The villagers would take everything. The stone would be taken. The hollow would be discovered. And his family would die with the rest. He did what he could. He left small gifts. A rabbit, placed on the path where a known hunter would find it. A bundle of wild herbs, left by the stream where the women gathered water. A handful of nuts, scattered near a known child's play area. He left these things anonymously, in the night, and he retreated before dawn. It was not enough. It was never enough. But it was something. He also found Zhou. The old hunter had survived. He was living in a remote valley, higher than the cave, in a shelter built into a rock overhang. He was thin. He was old. But he was alive. He had trapped a few rabbits. He had gathered what he could. He had refused to go to the village, to the commune, to the furnace. He had chosen the mountain, and the mountain had kept him. Chen Wei brought him food, meat, fish, honey. He did not ask for anything in return. He only asked for information. Zhou told him what he knew. The famine was everywhere. Not just Stone Hollow. The whole province. The whole country. The furnaces had burned the pots. The fields had gone unplanted. The grain had been taken. The reports had been lies. And now, the people were dying in millions. How long? Chen Wei asked. It will pass, Zhou said. It always passes. Famine is a fire. It burns until there is nothing left to burn. Then it goes out. The survivors plant. The rain falls. The crops grow. It will take 3 years. Maybe 4. Then the world will begin again. Will the cadres return? Some will. Some will be punished. The ones who lied. The ones who burned the pots. They will be blamed. New cadres will come. Wiser ones, perhaps. Or just different ones. But the village will return. The people will return. Stone Hollow will live again. Chen Wei nodded. He looked at the old hunter. He looked at the valley. He looked at the mountain. We will stay in the deep caves, he said. We will wait. We will survive. And when the world is ready, we will return. Or we will stay. We will see. You are wise, Zhou said. You are a mountain spirit. Or you have a mountain spirit's luck. Either way, you are wise. Chen Wei returned to the caves. He told his family what he had seen. He did not spare them. He told them about the famine. He told them about the village. He told them about the children who were dying, and the old people who were dying, and the strong people who were dying. He told them because they needed to know. They needed to understand why they were hiding, why they had left, why survival was not just a choice, but a necessity. They listened. They wept. They raged. They cursed the cadres. They cursed the revolution. They cursed the fate that had brought this upon them. But they did not blame Chen Wei. They did not blame the mountain. They understood. They had made the right choice. The only choice. And they endured. In the deep caves, in the dark, in the silence, they endured. They were the family that survived. They were the people who had chosen the mountain over the commune, and the mountain had kept them alive. The spring turned to summer. The summer turned to autumn. And the autumn brought another harvest. Not a great harvest, but a real one. The villagers who had survived planted what they could. The cadres did not take it all. The furnace had been abandoned. The red papers had been torn down. The world was changing. The famine was burning out. But Chen Wei did not bring his family back. Not yet. The winter was coming. The caves were safe. The stores were full. And he had a plan. A plan for the future. A plan for a life that was not just survival, but thriving. He had spent the year in the dark, and he had learned that the dark was not a place of fear. It was a place of power. A place of secrets. A place where a family could become something more than a commune could ever allow. He touched the stone. He felt the hollow. He felt the weight of survival. And he smiled, for the first time in months. A small smile. A ghost of a smile. But a smile. They were going to make it. The year 1959 arrived with a quiet that seemed almost suspicious. The cadres had gone. The furnace was a ruin of mud, brick, and rust. The communal kitchen was a hollow shell, its pots long since stolen and hidden by the villagers who had survived. The red papers had peeled away from the doors, leaving only pink rectangles of faded color. Stone Hollow was rebuilding, not with revolutionary fervor, with the quiet, desperate pragmatism of people who had survived the end of the world. The villagers who remained, perhaps half of what had been there 2 years ago, were planting. They were mending. They were burying the dead and reclaiming the fields. They were not talking about quotas. They were not talking about steel. They were talking about rain, about seed, about the price of salt. Chen Wei watched from the high places. He watched the village become a village again. He watched the old rituals return. The ancestor worship. The offerings at the cypress tree. The quiet bargaining between neighbors. The mountain had swallowed the revolution, and the old ways were returning like water, finding its level. He also watched for danger. The famine was ending, but the political winds were unpredictable. The Great Leap Forward had failed, but the party did not admit failure. It blamed local cadres. It blamed the weather. It blamed the peasants for not trying hard enough. New policies were coming. New movements. The cycle was beginning again, perhaps in a different form. But for now, the mountain was quiet. And the family in the deep caves was thriving. They had lived in the dark for a year. They had adapted. They had become something new. Not quite wild. Not quite civilized. A blend of the two. The old knowledge of the village, the new knowledge of the caves, the modern knowledge of Chen Wei's memories, all mixing together into a way of life that was uniquely theirs. Chen Wei had expanded their living space. He had found new chambers. He had cleared passages. He had built stone shelves for storage. He had created a system of ventilation that kept the air fresh without revealing smoke. He had built a secondary entrance, hidden behind a curtain of vines in the high valley, that allowed them to come and go without passing through the waterfall cave. He had also expanded the hollow. He had learned that the space was not entirely fixed. It responded to his will, to his need, to his growth. He could not make it larger by wishing, but he could organize it more efficiently. He built shelves of woven bamboo in the void. He hung the meat from invisible hooks. He stacked the grain in bins. He created a system. The hollow was no longer a pile of random bounty. It was a warehouse, a larder, a fortress of preserved life. The family had grown stronger. Chen Dali, despite his age and his missing fingers, had become a master of the stone. He could carve tools from the flint that they found in the cave walls. He had built a stone hand axe that was sharper than any steel blade. He had learned to read the cave's air, to predict changes in the weather by the way the drafts moved through the passages. Zhang Xiaoying had become a healer of remarkable skill. She had combined the herbal knowledge of the village with the new resources of the cave. She had found a fungus that, when brewed with wild ginger, could cure the coughs that had plagued them in the first winter. She had found a moss that, when pressed against a wound, stopped infection. She had become the doctor of the deep caves, and her family had not been sick in months. Xiaoming had become a hunter. At 11 years old, he was better with the bow than Chen Wei had been at 16. He could move through the forest without making a sound. He could read the trails. He could track a deer for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. He had killed his first deer alone, a young doe, and he had brought it back to the cave with a pride that was both childlike and ancient. He was no longer the starving boy of Stone Hollow. He was a mountain hunter, a warrior of the wilderness. And Chen Wei? Chen Wei had become the leader. Not by decree, not by force, by necessity. He was the one who planned, the one who explored, the one who carried the stone and the weight of the future. He had grown taller. His body had filled out with muscle and health. His face had lost the last softness of youth. He looked like a man. He felt like a man. And he carried the responsibility of a man. But he was also still a boy, in some ways. He still dreamed of the modern world. He still remembered his mother, the one who had sent him the grocery list, the one who had wept at his funeral. He still remembered the rain on the interstate. He still remembered the feeling of a smartphone in his hand, the casual miracle of information and connection. He missed these things sometimes, in the dark hours of the cave. But he did not miss them enough to wish himself back. He had a new life, a new family, a new purpose, and he would not trade it for all the smartphones in the world. In the spring of 1959, he made a decision. It was time to reclaim the surface, not to return to the village. Not yet, but to build a new home. A home on the surface, in the high valley, that could be used in the good months, while the deep caves remained a refuge for the bad months. A home that was hidden but open. A home that was safe but free. He chose a site, a grove of walnut trees, on a slope above the lake, where the sun reached all day and the wind was broken by the trees. It was a place that could not be seen from below, from the village, from the paths. It was a place that was visible only from the air, and the planes did not come anymore. He began to build. He felled trees. He split them with stone wedges. He used the techniques of the village, combined with techniques he had seen in documentaries, combined with techniques he invented from the materials at hand. He built a cabin. Not a house of mud and thatch, like the village. A cabin of logs, with a stone foundation, with a wooden floor, with a chimney of carefully fitted stone. It was small. 2 rooms. A sleeping area and a living area. But it was a palace compared to the cave. His family helped. Chen Dali shaped the stones. Zhang Xiaoying wove the bark for roofing. Xiaoming carried the wood. Endless trips back and forth, his small body bent under loads that would have broken him 2 years ago. They worked together. They sang. They laughed. They were building a future. It took 2 months. By midsummer, the cabin was finished. They moved in. They brought their blankets, their tools, their few possessions. They built a hearth. They hung a door of woven branches. They made it home. And they began to live. To really live. They fished in the lake. They hunted in the forest. They gathered in the meadows. They planted a small garden of wild vegetables, using seeds that Chen Wei had gathered and stored in the hollow. They had beans. They had squash. They had wild grain. They were not just surviving. They were farming. They were building. They were thriving. Chen Wei watched his family. He watched his brother run through the meadow, his bow over his shoulder, his dog, a feral dog that Xiaoming had tamed from the forest, running beside him. He watched his mother tend her garden, her hands in the soil, her face turned to the sun. He watched his father sit on the porch of the cabin, sharpening his stone axe, his face relaxed in a way that Chen Wei had never seen before. He touched the stone. He felt the hollow. He felt the stores, still vast, still full, still waiting. He felt the weight of the mountain. And he felt, for the first time since the rain on the interstate, a sense of peace. They had made it. Through the famine, through the revolution, through the dark, they had made it to the other side. And now, they had a home. A hidden home. A secret home. But a home. The sun set behind the mountain. The stars came out. The family sat on the porch, eating fresh fish and wild greens, watching the fireflies dance over the lake. They did not speak much. They did not need to. They were together. They were alive. And they were free. Chen Wei looked at the stars. He wondered, sometimes, if his modern mother was looking at the same stars. He wondered if she was still alive. If she had survived the grief of his death. If she had found peace. He hoped so. He hoped she knew, somehow, that he was okay. That he was alive in a way. That he had found a new life, a new purpose, a new family. He touched the stone. He whispered, so quietly that no one could hear, "Thank you." He did not know who he was thanking. The mountain, the stone, the universe, the rain, the truck, the fate that had killed him and reborn him in the same breath. He only knew that he was grateful. Grateful for the pain. Grateful for the struggle. Grateful for the second chance. He lay back on the porch. He closed his eyes. He listened to the mountain, the wind, the water, the fireflies, the breathing of his family. And he slept. He slept without dreams. He slept without fear. He slept like a man who had finally found his place in the world. The autumn of 1959 brought a decision that Chen Wei had been dreading. It was time to return to Stone Hollow. Not to stay, not to submit, but to see, to know, to understand what had become of the world they had left. And, if possible, to help. The famine was ending. The crops were growing. The village was rebuilding. But there were still people there. People his family had known. People his mother had grown up with. People his father had fought beside. They could not simply abandon them to history. Chen Wei went alone. He left his family in the cabin, in the high valley, with enough food and enough weapons to survive any threat. He walked down the mountain paths for the first time in a year, carrying only his bow, his knife, and a pack that seemed to contain a few wild herbs and a small amount of dried meat. In reality, it contained much more. The hollow held a fortune that could save the village. But he had to be careful. He had to be strategic. He could not simply appear with a mountain of food and expect to be believed. He would be called a thief, a bandit, a cadre's hidden agent. Or worse, he would be overwhelmed, his stores taken, his family exposed. He reached the village on a gray afternoon. The autumn mist was rising from the paddies, and the village looked older than he remembered. The houses were weathered. Some were abandoned, their doors open, their hearths cold. The streets were empty. The chickens were gone, eaten or stolen. The dogs were gone, eaten or dead. The village was a ghost of itself. He walked to his old house. The door was gone, taken for firewood. The thatch was falling in. The red paper strip was a tatter of pink on the mud wall. He stepped inside. The floor was littered with leaves and bird droppings. The clay pots were broken. The sleeping mat was rotting. It was a ruin, a tomb. He stood there for a long time. He felt the weight of the past. The body that was not his body remembered this place. The childhood, the hunger, the fever, the mother's hand on his forehead, the father's scarred hand on his shoulder, the brother's eyes. This was where it had begun. This was where Chen Xiaowei had died, and Chen Wei had been born. He left the house. He walked to the village square. There, he found people. A few old women. A few children. A man he recognized as the village carpenter, now missing an eye and most of his teeth. They looked at him with suspicion, then with recognition, then with shock. Chen Xiaowei, the carpenter said. His voice was a rasp. The ghost? They said you died in the mountain. I did not die, Chen Wei said. I survived. How? The mountain kept me. The villagers gathered. They were thin. They were sick. They had the hollow eyes and swollen bellies of the recently starved. But they were alive. They were curious. They were hopeful, in a desperate way. Chen Wei told them a story. Not the true story. Not the story of the stone and the magic and the transmigration. But a story close enough to the truth that it felt real. He told them of the high valley, the hidden cave, the hunting, the fishing, the life away from the commune. He told them that his family had survived by leaving, by refusing to burn the pots and starve in the square. He told them that the mountain had provided, because the mountain did not care about quotas or steel or revolution. The mountain only cared about those who respected it. The villagers listened. They did not cheer. They did not believe entirely. But they listened. And when he finished, an old woman, the same old woman who had sat on the bench the day he woke from the fever, spoke. "We thought you were a ghost," she said. "We thought the mountain had taken you. But you are alive. And your family is alive. And you have food." "I have some," he said. He opened his pack. He brought out the herbs, the dried meat, the nuts. He gave them to the old woman. She took them with trembling hands. She divided them among the children. They ate slowly, carefully, as the starving do. "There is more," Chen Wei said. "In the high valley. The mountain is full of food. The lake has fish. The forest has game. The meadows have nuts and roots. But you must work. You must learn. You must leave the village and go to the mountain." "The cadres will not allow it," the carpenter said. "They will return. They always return. The cadres are gone. The commune is dead. The world is changing. The mountain does not belong to the cadres. It belongs to those who live on it." The villagers looked at each other. They were afraid. They had been broken by the commune, by the furnace, by the famine. They did not know how to be free. They had forgotten. But the children looked at Chen Wei with something else. Not fear. Wonder. They saw a boy who had survived the mountain. A boy who had beaten the famine. A boy who had come back from the dead with food and stories and hope. "I will teach you," Chen Wei said. "I will show you the paths, the hunting grounds, the fishing spots, the places to gather. But you must keep them secret. You must not tell the cadres. You must not tell the county. You must keep the mountain's secrets, as I have kept them." The old woman nodded. "We will keep the secrets. We are good at keeping secrets. We have kept them for 1,000 years." Chen Wei spent 3 days in the village. He taught them what he could. He showed them how to set snares, how to find wild tubers, how to make fish traps from woven bamboo. He left them food, hidden in the forest, marked with stones that only they would recognize. He told them about the high valley, but he did not tell them where it was. He told them to find their own valleys, their own caves, their own hiding places. On the 4th day, he left. He walked back up the mountain. The villagers watched him go. The children followed him to the edge of the bamboo, then stopped, afraid of the deep forest. He turned. He raised his hand. He vanished into the green. He did not return to Stone Hollow for many years. But he heard, through the mountain grapevine, through the occasional traveler, through Zhou the old hunter, that the village had survived, that they had learned, that they had become hunters and gatherers, supplementing their farming with the mountain's bounty, that they had survived the next political storm and the next, because they had learned the lesson of the mountain, the lesson that Chen Wei had taught them. He returned to the cabin. His family was waiting. Xiaoming had caught a fish. Zhang Xiuying had baked nut bread. Chen Dali had repaired the roof. They were alive. They were together. They were home. Chen Wei sat on the porch. He looked at the mountain. He looked at the lake. He looked at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He had done what he could. He had saved his family. He had helped the village. He had survived the famine, the revolution, and the dark. He had built a new life from the ashes of the old. And he had the stone. He had the hollow. He had the mountain. He was 16 years old. He had lived 2 lives. And he was just beginning. The new year of 1960 did not come with fireworks. It did not come with banners. It came with the first snow of the season, falling gently on the cabin roof, and with the sound of Zhang Xiuying's voice, singing the old songs in the warmth of the fire. They had lived in the cabin for half a year. It had been the best half year of their lives. Not because it was easy. It was never easy. The mountain was still a hard master. The hunting required patience. The gathering required knowledge. The winter was coming, and with it the cold, the dark, and the hunger that always lurked at the edge of abundance. But they were free. They were not part of a commune. They were not subject to cadres. They did not wake to the sound of a bell calling them to labor in a field they did not own. They woke to the sound of the stream. They worked for themselves. They ate what they caught, what they gathered, what they grew. They were poor by any material measure, but they were rich in ways that the modern world had forgotten. Chen Wei had spent the autumn preparing. He had filled the hollow with the bounty of the high valley. He had dried meat in the smokehouse. He had gathered nuts by the sack. He had smoked fish and stored tubers. He had prepared the cabin for winter, chinking the gaps with moss, laying in a supply of firewood that would last for months. He had also prepared the deep caves. They were still their refuge, their final defense. If the cadres returned, if the world turned dark again, they could retreat into the stone and wait it out. The cabin was their home. The caves were their castle. The mountain was their kingdom. The new year was a quiet celebration. They did not have rice wine. They had honey water, sweet and golden. They did not have dumplings. They had venison stew, thick with tubers and wild onions, cooked in the iron pot that Chen Wei had retrieved from the hollow. They did not have fireworks. They had the fire, the family, and the mountain. They sat around the hearth. Xiaoming had made decorations from pine cones and dried berries. He had strung them on a thread of wild flax and hung them from the ceiling beam. It was the most beautiful thing they had ever owned. Zhang Xiuying had sewn new clothes from cured hides, soft and warm. Chen Dali had carved a small statue of a mountain goat from a piece of walnut wood, its horns curved, its eyes calm. It sat on the mantel above the fire. Chen Wei gave gifts. He gave his father a new knife, steel, forged by a blacksmith in a distant valley that he had visited in secret. He gave his mother a jade comb, found in the ruins of an ancient temple in the mountain, its surface carved with flowers. He gave his brother a bow, a real bow, made of yew and horn and sinew, stronger and more beautiful than anything he had made before. They gave him gifts in return. Xiaoming gave him a drawing, charcoal on birch bark. It showed the cabin, the lake, the family, and above them, a boy with a stone around his neck, his hand raised, the mountain rising behind him like a wave. It was primitive. It was beautiful. It was true. Zhang Xiuying gave him a jacket. She had sewn it from rabbit fur and deer hide, soft and warm, with a hidden pocket inside for the stone. She had made it without his knowledge, working in the nights while he slept. It fit perfectly. Chen Dali gave him words. He did not give objects. He gave something harder. He sat by the fire, his scarred hands on his knees, and he spoke. I watched you die, he said. I watched the fever take you. I watched your breath stop. I watched your mother weep. And then I watched you rise. I watched you become something new, something I do not understand. But I know this. You saved us. You saved me. You saved your mother. You saved your brother. You took us from the fire and brought us to the mountain. You are my son. You are my blood. And I am proud of you. Chen Wei could not speak. He sat by the fire, the stone warm against his chest, the jacket soft on his shoulders, the drawing in his hands, and he wept. Not loudly. He was a man now, or close enough. But the tears came, and he let them fall into the fire, where they hissed and vanished. Thank you, father, he said. Thank you, mother. Thank you, Xiaoming. Thank you for following me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being my family. They ate. They drank the honey water. They sang. They told stories. They laughed. They were a family, in a cabin, in a valley, on a mountain, in a time of revolution and famine and death. And they were happy, not ignorant happy, not naive happy, but the deep, hard-won happiness of survivors. The happiness of people who had chosen life, and who had fought for it, and who had won. The snow fell outside. The fire burned inside. The mountain watched over them, ancient and indifferent, and, in its own way, kind. Chen Wei touched the stone. He entered the hollow one last time that night. He looked at his stores. The meat, the fish, the grain, the nuts, the honey, the medicine, the tools, the wealth of a kingdom, compressed into a space the size of a room. He had enough. More than enough. He had enough to survive the winter. Enough to survive another famine. Enough to survive whatever the next decade would bring. He returned to the cabin. He looked at his family. He looked at the fire. He looked at the future. He was ready. He was always ready. That was the nature of survival. You did not wait for the storm to pass. You learned to dance in the rain. You learned to build in the snow. You learned to live in the dark and to find the light. He was Chen Wei. He was Chen Xiaowei. He was the ghost of Stone Hollow. He was the keeper of the hollow. He was the son of the mountain, and he was home. Years passed. The mountain did not change. The seasons turned. The snow fell and melted. The streams froze and ran. The trees grew. The animals were born and died and were born again. The mountain was eternal, and in the high valley, the family endured. Chen Wei grew. He became a man in truth, not just in body. He became a hunter without equal in the province. He became a legend. The mountain people spoke of him in whispers. The boy who had survived the famine. The boy who had beaten the commune. The boy who carried the mountain's heart in a stone around his neck. He never married. Not because he did not have the opportunity. The mountain people had daughters. The survivors of Stone Hollow had granddaughters. But Chen Wei did not seek companionship of that kind. His love was for his family. His purpose was for survival. His heart was filled with the stone and the mountain and the memory of a world that had died in the rain. Romance was not a path he chose. He was a guardian, a keeper, a sentinel. And sentinels did not marry. They watched. His brother Xiaoming grew into a man. He became the hunter that Chen Wei had been. He took a wife from a remote valley, a girl who knew the mountain as well as he did. They had children. They built a second cabin near the lake, and then a third. The high valley became a small settlement, a hidden community, a place of survivors. His parents aged. Chen Dali's hands grew more twisted. His back bent, but his eyes remained sharp. He died one winter, peacefully, in his sleep, in the cabin by the fire. They buried him on the ridge above the valley, where the sun touched the stone all day. Zhang Xiuying followed him 2 years later. She died in spring, when the wildflowers were blooming, sitting on the porch with her face to the sun. They buried her beside her husband. And Chen Wei stood on the ridge, looking at their graves, and he felt the weight of mortality. Even with the stone, even with the hollow, even with all the power of survival. Death came. Death was part of the mountain. But life continued. Xiaoming's children grew. The settlement grew. The village of Stone Hollow, down below, became a trading partner. They exchanged furs for salt. They exchanged knowledge for peace. They kept the secret of the high valley. They kept the secret of the stone. Chen Wei became old. Not old in the way of modern men, but old in the way of mountain men. Weathered, scarred, lean. His hair turned gray, then white. His eyes remained sharp. His hands remained steady. He still hunted. He still gathered. He still carried the stone. And the hollow? The hollow remained. It was always there. Always full. A fortress of preserved life, waiting for the day when it would be needed again. Chen Wei added to it over the years. Not with the desperate intensity of the famine years, but with the steady patience of a man who knew that winter always came, that famine always returned, that the mountain gave and the mountain took. He kept it ready. He kept it full. He kept it secret. He died in the winter of 1982. He was 43 years old. Old for a mountain man. He died in the cabin, by the fire, with the stone in his hand. He did not die in pain. He died in peace. He had lived 2 lives. He had survived the impossible. He had kept his family alive. He had fulfilled the promise he made on the day he woke in the thatched house, looking at a ceiling he did not recognize. His nephew, Xiaoming's eldest son, found him. He found the stone in his uncle's hand. He did not know its power. He thought it was a keepsake, a charm. He buried it with Chen Wei on the ridge beside his parents, where the sun touched the stone all day. And there, beneath the earth, the stone waited. The hollow waited, full of food, full of tools, full of the accumulated survival of a lifetime, waiting for the next person who would touch it and wake it, waiting for the next soul who needed a second chance. The mountain continued. The seasons turned. The world changed. The modern world that Chen Wei had left behind caught up with the mountain. Roads came. Electricity came. The high valley was discovered, eventually, by hikers and naturalists. The cabins were preserved as historical sites. The cave behind the waterfall became a tourist attraction. But the stone remained buried. The hollow remained hidden. And somewhere, in the world that Chen Wei had come from, the rain still fell on the interstate. The trucks still drove. The phone still rang. And the universe, in its infinite and mysterious way, continued to give second chances to those who were ready to take them. The mountain was eternal. The mountain was patient. And the mountain kept its secrets forever.